Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Writer's Journey podcast. I am your host, Mark Nadon, and thanks for joining me. This is the first episode in the podcast series. I actually recorded this podcast years ago and had some interviews with authors, so you'll get to hear those interviews. They're going to be backdated a bit, so a little bit out of date. But I still wanted to put them out there because I feel like I owe those authors who took the time to interview with me having that podcast put out there. So bear that in mind. I think there's 3 or so episodes that are going to be a little bit outdated, but then we'll continue the journey from there. I stopped doing the podcast after I had recorded a few episodes just because of business, essentially. I ran a business for 12 years, a fitness company, and decided that I had to really focus on that rather than jumping between writing and business and family. There's just so much going on. It's really hard to stick with any one thing. Since all of that, my business is actually no longer here, and I am employed elsewhere. So that actually helps free me up to do the writing that I've wanted to do, and I have been. It's freed me up to do even the running that I want to do. As you can see, behind me, fitness and writing are probably my two biggest passions, and in my family, three biggest passions. My family being up there at number one, and wanting to share some of that journey. I think it's challenging to figure out how to balance so many things that you have going on and try and stay consistent and try and learn. So the things that I do the most of probably being right now, I do a lot of writing, I do a lot of reading, and I watch lectures and jump in webinars that I can. Obviously, COVID-19 going on right now, so there's lots of stuff happening on the web, and when possible, I hope to get involved more in in-person events and things like that, because I think having a community, I don't really have. I have a friend of mine who's actually you're going to listen to, Liam Gibbs, who you'll listen to his episode coming up pretty soon, and he's a good friend of mine who's also a writer, but I don't have a lot of other good writing friends who I can just sit down with and use as beta readers and whatnot. So it's something I'm actually going to talk about trying to establish as time goes on. So the interview or the podcast is going to be about interviewing other people and their writer's journey, and then just talking about mine. I didn't want to limit the podcast to any particular genre or self-published versus trad-published. So you can expect to hear from pretty much anybody, even if you're not published, just what your journey has been so far. I know myself, I've written probably 7 or 8 full-length novels. The first one I wrote I started when I was about 16 or 17 years old, and that took me years to write. It ended up being I think like a 700-page manuscript, kind of Brandon Sanderson length style book, and I just didn't feel like that book had been written well enough to attempt publishing it. And at the time, that was so long ago now, I'm pretty old. At the time, trad publishing was what you had. The traditional publishing was what you were looking to get into. The self-publishing world it existed, but it just wasn't as big as it is now. It wasn't as accessible as it is now with Amazon kind of taking a lot of that over in Kobo. So I wanted to give the opportunity for writers from all walks of life to be able to to be able to send in their story. So I talked a little bit about my background in writing. I started when I was really young. I was 16 or so when I started writing. What got me into writing was actually a book called The Scions of Shannara from Terry Brooks. If you've ever read that, it's a fantasy book, and that book really, I just loved the book. I love the characters. I love the world, the escape into that world. I read pretty much every other book Terry Brooks wrote, and then just kind of blew up from there. So I always wanted to write that kind of quest story, and that was my first book, was actually a big quest story. Since then, I still love fantasy, and there's still elements of that in my current books, but it's not Not quite the same. I've read a lot of different authors that I like a lot. George R. R. Martin is a big name that I read a lot of. Stephen King. I'm not a big horror fan, but I mean, if you read Stephen King novels, the way he writes, I mean, it's just so good. You can't not read his books, even if you don't like horror. And John Grisham being another one. I love the murder mysteries, the lawyers, battling it out in the court system and the investigations of all these different books that he puts out. And obviously, he's an incredible writer as well. I am not traditionally published or self-published yet, so I'm fairly early in the journey. I've just been writing a lot of books, writing a lot of short stories, sent out short stories to different publications, got some nice letters back as rejections, but did not. I just don't think I worked hard enough and pursued it enough to hit the goal that I was aiming for, which was publication. So I haven't yet. In that, I mean, I have been published in fitness, and that's kind of my background. So I do have published articles in Canada's Health and Fitness magazine, and my own blog with my last company that I was with. So I've had been on the news and whatnot, but it's not the same as having a piece of fiction published. So right now I'm reading a book by Stephen King called Dr. Sleep. I just finished. I've actually read a bunch of Stephen King books recently. I just finished The Outsider. I finished his new book. What was that called? The Boy in the Institute. The Institute, they're both really, really good books, and I'm looking forward to If It Sleeps, which is out now. I haven't had a chance to pick it up. Recently read John Grisham's books. We've still been doing a lot of reading. We'll see how Dr. Sleep turns out, and I'll talk a little bit about that in one of the episodes. I'll be asking other writers during the interview about their current reads and what they have going on and their recommended reads, and passing on. Where are we getting our inspiration from? What are some of our favorite books that have really inspired us? So I've already mentioned Terry Brooks was one of my biggest inspirations when I was young, and I think that fired me up for pretty much forever. I mean, I've read a lot of books that have inspired me that I really enjoyed, but that one really is the one that started it all. I'm going to ask authors or writers to read from their books, a short excerpt, and I'm going to do the same. I decided that I was going to read actually a collaboration with my kids. So coronavirus, writing with my kids, we all sat down as a little project and wrote a story together. It's 250 words, so it's pretty short, and it's called A Fart Saves the Day. So I hope you enjoy it. Jason walks down the street and spots a goblin gang climbing up the brick wall of a tavern. One goblin, who wore a name tag that said Atriox, carries an axe strapped to his back so large it should have taken 3 goblins to carry. Jason, the town's only eldritch knight, annoyed by the teenage goblins, decides to teach them a lesson by heading to the goblins' gardens and eating their beans. Eating goblin beans gives him the power to fart enough to blast him into the air like fireworks are strapped to his back. Without delay, Jason farts himself over the tavern, landing on the roof next to an angry Atriox. Atriox pulls the axe from his back and swings it over his head, trying to cut Jason in half. Not to be outdone by a goblin, Jason spins around, bends over, and farts. The axe reverses direction and smacks Atriox in the face. Atriox falls down and disappears off the roof. Jason's face is drilled into the roof, and his head breaks through the tavern ceiling, giving him a full view of the inside. All commotion in the tavern stops, and a dozen dwarves stare up at him. Jason pulls his head out and hears the dwarves burst through the tavern door and head up after him. The remaining goblins, angered by Atriox's defeat, pull their scimitars from their sheaths and attack. Thankfully, the angered dwarves arrive moments later, and because of their disgust for goblins, they aid Jason in defeating them. So we originally wrote this story, just me and my kids. We just kind of put little pieces of it together, then we weaved the story together, then we edited it down to 250 words. I think when we started it was about, the first draft was maybe 400 words, so we really had to to cut that down. Anyway, it was a fun little project. I would recommend doing it if your kids are into writing, to jumping on that, because it was a lot of fun. My current project is called Untitled. I was actually just gonna try and pull it out of my mind, and I realized I didn't even have a title for it. Yeah, I'm terrible with titles. I find them a pain in the butt to write, to come up with. So I don't have a title. It's an unnamed works. I will be talking more about it in another episode, but I did want to say I finished the first draft and just about finished the second draft. It took me, I think I started early February. I'd have to look at my notes. So it's been February, March, April, halfway through May. So it's been about 3.5, 4 months to get through draft one and draft two. I suspect, from what I've read of my own writing, it's still got a little ways to go. So maybe we're going to end up with a fourth, fifth draft before it goes to a beta reader and then goes to an editor and then moving on from there. My strategy for this to get through the book that fast, because I think it's probably the quickest I've written a book. Personally, I'm not a big outliner. I'm a little bit more of a discovery writer. I had an idea of where I wanted to go with that story, but I didn't have detailed outlines, and I kind of regret that a little bit because my characters didn't have the development they probably could have used. So in my second draft that I'm going through now, it's like trying to build more character, and now that I know who they are, because I've written one version of the story, it's like going back and trying to fix all that and trying to add more things and making the second draft really. That second draft's actually longer than the first draft because I'm not cutting, I'm adding to come up with all the things that I didn't include in the first draft. So that was quite a bit of work, and probably should have outlined it a little bit more. I think in book two, because the plan is to have it in a 3-book series. In book two, I expect to do a little bit more outlining. I've taken a look at Scrivener, which is a writing program, and it looks pretty neat to organize like who your characters are and where they go. And I think I'm gonna like jump on Google and take just images of just what my characters roughly look like, so that I can constantly pull that up when I need to, rather than just trying to memorize everything. I find when, depending on how many characters you have in your book, and although my book really didn't have too many, or like it wasn't an overwhelming book to write as far as characters, but there were still a lot of characters to keep track of and what they look like. And yeah, it's a learning experience, and it's been a good experience. So that's where I'm at right now. I'm just finishing up draft two, fixing a lot of the problems. I think I still have a lot of problems to go. I also plan to run it through Pro Writing Aid. It's something I purchased when it was, a one-time fee for life, and that came in handy. A number of years later, still have it because it's for life. So I'll be running the book through there to have a better idea of some of the English mistakes and the passive voice and tense errors and stuff like that. So yeah, there's still quite a bit to go through, but I'm excited to push it forward and see what happens. So thanks for joining me. I hope you liked the first episode. I know it's just me talking, so if you don't know me and you probably don't care too much, that's okay. Maybe one day you'll watch this having heard about me, or you care a little bit more, and you'll have a better idea of where I started. I hope it inspires you. I guess I'm talking about it or giving this story just to keep myself on track and motivated. And if I'm going to create a podcast every couple of weeks to put out, then I want to have something to say to something I've worked on, something I've built on. I absolutely love writing, and I hope it continues to be something that I can do. Oh, one more thing. My favorite way to think about writing. So everyone, I guess, has their own little methods of where do your, I guess if the question was where do your story ideas come from, where do I develop ideas? One of my favorite ways is running, because I'm actually a distance runner and running in the trails. So that's one of my favorite ways to build up a story. So a lot of the times I also listen to podcasts. I listen to stories from other writers. So I feel like when I do have time, I'm constantly using that time to work on my writing or work on my skills at writing or to read, which I read in a way that helps me, well, I try to learn from people that are already better than I am and see what I can pick up what I like about what they write. In some cases, some authors what I don't like about how they write stories. I know there are. Um, I like fast-paced stories. I like action. So when you give me too much description, um, too much of I guess a world-based story, it's not really my favorite. So those stories don't sit as well with me. I still think they have their place. Like Tom Clancy's an example, the Jack Ryan series. People love it, and it was well written. It was a good story, but there was just a lot of that back end stuff that I didn't enjoy it as much. If you want to reach me on social media, you can check my Instagram, Mark PJ Nadon, or you can head to Facebook, also under Mark PJ Nadon, which is my author's page. I follow on YouTube if you're not watching it on YouTube right now, or Apple Podcasts, wherever you're listening to it. It helps if you click that follow or the like button, so you can get every episode that comes out and you don't miss it. So jump down there and press that button.